Good morning. We're here at Lola Montez trailhead. Here's a little sign to get us on our way, and we're just off Interstate 80. I hope you can hear me because of the traffic. Lola Montez is a special lady. There are two lakes named after her, Lola Montez Lower Lake and Lola Montez Upper Lake. Not only that, there's a peak named Lola Montez. So in order to find out why Lola Montez has so much recognition, we're going to have to go back to 1821 and start our story in Ireland.
Sligo, Ireland, a wedding would take place between 15-year-old Elizabeth Oliver and 25-year-old Ensign Edward Gilbert. The following year, Elizabeth would give birth to a baby girl. The child would become one of the most beautiful women of the Victorian age, known to all as Lola Montez. Lola would attribute her exotic olive complexion and dark hair to having been a descendant of the wealthy 16th century Montalvo family. In reality, Lola's grandfather was Sir Oliver, High Sheriff of Cork, Ireland, and a Member of Parliament. Her grandmother was Mary Green, a milliner by trade. Mary was either Portuguese or Spanish. She was Sir Oliver's mistress, who bore him 4 children. Her last born was Elizabeth, Lola's mother. Shortly after the birth of their child, Gilbert's regiment was told to report to Liverpool for deployment to India. Elizabeth and their infant daughter would accompany Edward to India. The infant's baptism would take place in Liverpool's St. Peter's Church. The Gilberts would baptize their infant girl Marie, Dolores, Eliza, Rossana, Gilbert. Her family called her Dolores, the diminutive of which is Lola. Years later, reminiscing, Elizabeth told Lola their passage around Cape Hope to Calcutta took 40 days. Elizabeth might have underestimated the length of sailing from Liverpool to Calcutta. Using only sails, such a voyage could take up to 90 days. Shortly after arriving in Calcutta, Edward Gilbert reported for duty. His regiment was sent out on maneuvers. Tragically, he contracted cholera and suddenly died. Elizabeth would tell Lola that her father's last words were that he asked his best friend, Lieutenant George Zecchi, please promise you will look after my wife and daughter. Shortly after her husband's death, Elizabeth would marry Lieutenant George Zecchi. Elizabeth's new husband tried hard to live up to his friend's dying wishes, but Lola was a mischievous child. By age 7, she was described as a queer, wayward little Indian girl. It was decided to send Lola back to Scotland for a proper English education. She would be under the care of her stepfather. Lola's carefree spirit did not change. During church services, she stuck flowers in the wig of an elderly congregant, as well as reportedly ran naked through town. At age 10, Lola was transferred to the care of her step-grandfather's sister, then again bounced to a boarding school in Bath, England. It had been 8 years since Elizabeth had seen Lola. Knowing her daughter was turning 15, Elizabeth boarded a ship for London. 15 was a respectable age for a woman to marry. Elizabeth had exciting news. She had arranged the perfect match for Lola. Major General Lumley, age 64, had agreed to marry Lola. On the long voyage, Elizabeth had become very friendly with a young Irish officer, Lieutenant Thomas James, age 28. Elizabeth revealed her secret marriage plans for Lola to Thomas. Thomas would accompany Elizabeth to Bath. In Bath, Lieutenant James confessed to Lola that the real reason Elizabeth had returned to England was to bring Lola back to India to marry the elderly Major General Lumley. Lola was mortified. In one account, Lola proposed a way to avoid her mother's arranged marriage. Lola suggested that she and Lieutenant James should elope. Lieutenant James thought for a moment. He could continue to pursue Elizabeth or accept Elizabeth's daughter's proposal. On impulse, he agreed with Lola, and they eloped to Ireland. Elizabeth reluctantly agreed to the marriage, but not her blessing. She then sailed alone back to India. For the first 8 months of matrimony, the newlyweds resided in Ireland, for which time Lieutenant James received orders to report to Liverpool for deployment to India. In Lola's words, Lieutenant James and his child wife reported for duty. Lola was having afterthoughts about her hasty marriage. She is quoted as saying, She escaped a gouty old man, lost her mother, and gained the outside shell of a husband who had neither a brain or a heart. Our novella would continue in India as we add two new lovers, Lola's mother plus another shipboard romance. Lola's husband's assignment would not be in gay and fashionable Calcutta, but 480 miles inland in rural Kurwal. Her mode of transportation to Kurwal would be in a palanquin. A palanquin was a decorated box with a chair inside, carried on the shoulders by 8 men, 4 at a time, rotating turns. Soon after arriving in Kurwal, their marriage quickly fell apart. Lola found that her husband was not only abusive but also unfaithful. The infidelity began with simple morning rides with another officer's wife. Lola could care less about her husband's tryst. Their morning rides gave Lola more time to sleep. One day, their horseback ride extended into an overnight affair. For obvious reasons, Lola laughed the tryst off. The woman's jilted husband, however, broke out into a jealous rage. To say the least, Lola found his theatrics amusing. In true Victorian drama, Lola's lady friends were concerned for Lola's mental health and recommended that Lola return to Calcutta to be with her mother. Back in Calcutta, Lola's mother locked Lola in a bedroom. Her mother feared for her daughter's sanity. A doctor was called. It was thought best that Lola return to England. Within 10 days at sea, in today's lingo, Lola would hook up with a young officer named George Lennox. He was age 20. She had left England for India with her husband, and now she had returned with a young lover. Victorian England did not approve of her cohabitation. Lola was not welcomed back with open arms. Neither did the court. Her husband filed a complaint of abandonment. George Lennox was named in the complaint. The judge ruled that as long as her legal husband, Lieutenant James, remained alive, Lola was not permitted to remarry. A divorce would not be granted. So how did an Irish teenager, estranged from her husband, transform herself into an exotic Spanish ballet dancer, becoming the second most famous woman after Queen Victoria? Our saga continues. Lola's stepfather met Lola at the port. He offered to help Lola by offering her lodging in Scotland. He saw Lola as a grass widow, a wounded, sick, fragile young woman. Lola refused. She did not want to live in stodgy, theocratic Scotland. It was not for her. Her stepfather accepted her decision, gave her $5,000, and with that and her jewelry, she set out to seek her own path. Unable to manage her finances, Lola's funds were quickly spent. However, a twist of fate would change her life. Lola found refuge with the noted London actress Frances Kelly. Fanny Kelly, as she was known by, also owned an acting school. Fanny was also known for her eccentric behavior. Once Fanny played the part of a man in a play, which broke the precept of Victorian society. A woman should never play the part of a man. Fanny quickly recognized the beauty of Lola. Her olive complexion and raven black hair would be perfect for the London stage. The only problem was her elocution of the Queen's English was totally lacking. Unwilling to let Lola slip by, Fanny decided to transform Lola into a danseuse, a ballet dancer. To mask her poor elocution, Lola would take on the persona of a Spanish flamenco dancer. Fanny hired a Spanish dance instructor. For the next 4 months, Lola studied acting and dancing. To finish her training, Lola left London for Cadiz, Spain. In Spain, she learned how to dance and speak like a Spaniard. She even acquired a story that she was a war widow. To complete her tale, she would maintain she was in Spain with her Spanish family, the Montalvos. Lola booked passage from Cadiz to Southampton. Aboard the ship was the Earl of Malmesbury, a true patron of the arts. Lola applied her charms. Gossip would imply a pleasant, intimate return to London. Smitten, the Earl would introduce Lola to the manager of Her Majesty's Theatre. Benjamin Lumley was the theatre's manager. He loved Italian opera as well as mingling with the upper crust of British society. His goal was to bring new and exciting performers to the opera house. When Lumley heard about a new Spanish exotic ballet talent who wished to give her debut in London, he jumped at the chance and signed the unknown Donna Lola Montez to a contract. Her Majesty's Theatre, June 3, 1843, special attraction. Mr. Benjamin Lumley begs to announce that, between the acts of the opera, Donna Lola Montez of the Theatre Real Civil will have the honor to make her first appearance in England in the original Spanish dance, El Oleano. I could not find El Oleano in my dictionary. My Spanish experts, Anna and Paul, reminded me to look at the first three letters, ole. It is what a crowd yells to the matador. Ano, without a tilde, translates into English as anus, but add a tilde, and año translates into year. A better translation for her dance would be the dance of hurrah. Lola's signature dance was the dance of the tarantula. The tarantula dance was not new, as it was a popular folk dance in Sicily, Italy. Lola mixed her novice ballet movements with drama and eroticism. As trumpets piped and the curtains opened, Lola gave the London audience something never seen before. As a London paper wrote, her head thrown back, eyes flashing, mimicking the crushing of spiders that had invaded her undergarments, the audience was enthralled. It did not take long for the London press to reveal that Lola Montez was really Lola Gilbert James. Far from a Spanish war hero's widow, Lola was the woman who abandoned her husband, who was valiantly serving Her Majesty's army in India. Cheers soon changed to boos. Two versions of what happened next. Lola said the debut was a successful one, but the engagement was broken off immediately by a difficulty as to terms between myself and the director, and though I was entirely out of money, I refused to go on for the terms offered. The director, Benjamin Lumley, had a different perspective. She had no pretensions to the title of danseuse. She was the veriest novice in her art, which she had never studied. On the discovery of the truth, I declined to allow the English adventuress, for such she was, another appearance on my boards. On hearing of her daughter's humiliation, Elizabeth donned a mourning gown and announced to her friends that her daughter had died. Lola needed to flee England and find a new venue for her signature spider dance, as well as her other ballet efforts. In Lola's words, through management of influential friends, an opening was made for me at the Royal Theatre at Dresden, Saxony, where I met the celebrated artist Franz Liszt. With little financial support, she was once again a woman traveling alone in the Victorian age. Our tale of Liszt and Lola might have actually begun in Paris. Lola's debut was less than stellar performance, but it opened doors as she was introduced to Franz Liszt. The youthful Liszt was the heartthrob of Europe. One observer wrote, Lola Montez, the fury Andalusian, whom all men coveted, threw herself into his arms and insisted that she become his forever. Lola accompanied Liszt to Dresden. There they spent a passionate week together. Then one night, Lola became involved in a late-night argument with an Italian operatic tenor. Lola, being Lola, gave the tenor a violent slap across his face. Liszt locked Lola in her hotel room and headed down to the manager, where he paid their hotel bill, added an extra payment for the damages Lola would create. Liszt quickly skipped town. In the 1955 musical comedy Damn Yankees, the musical comedy featured a song, Whatever Lola Wants, Lola Gets. The verse was supposedly lifted from the 19th century colloquial reference to Lola Montez. As she crisscrossed Europe, she indeed got what she wanted. Many times she punctuated her wishes with a horsewhip. No police or guard dared to obstruct her passage. While Liszt continued his tour, Lola did likewise, heading to the Black Forest and the spa town of Baden. However, her fame had preceded her arrival. Local officials denied her permission to perform. Her dance was considered inappropriate. Lola headed to Warsaw, Poland. In Warsaw, the aged and very unattractive Prince Viceroy of Poland tried to seduce Lola by plying her with expensive gifts, of which she refused. While Lola had 25 known love affairs and 3 marriages, in which 2 of her marriages broke British law, Lola did have her standards. With regard to the Polish Viceroy, in Lola's words, "Old men are never wise when in love. A death's head making love to a lady could not have been more disgusting or horrible sight." With the Viceroy present at her performance, shouts against the autocratic government rang through Lola's performance. Lola was accused of fostering a riot. The next day, the jilted Viceroy called for Lola's arrest. Lola had to be rescued by the French consul and escorted out of Poland, where she headed back to Paris. Back in Paris, Lola would enter into a new affair with Alexandre du Jouret. Lola thought Alexandre would be her perfect match. He was not only wealthy, but owned one of the largest circulating newspapers in France. To Lola, his newspaper would be a perfect conduit to publicize her performances. Her dalliance with André also expanded Lola's knowledge of current events in Europe. The latter would be important in her travels to Bavaria. Unfortunately, her new paramour was challenged to a duel, in which he came in second. Lola also captivated the heart of Alexandre Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers. While their romance might have lasted just a few days, Dumas eloquently summed up the danger of entering Lola's web. "She has the evil eye. Those who look upon her will die." Looking for a new gig to earn a little money, Lola headed to Munich, Bavaria. Her goal was to speak to King Ludwig I directly and gain permission to perform at the Munich Oktoberfest. To hide her true identity, she assumed a new name, Donna Lola Montez, Señorita Montez of Spanish nobility. Ludwig I was married to Therese of Saxe. On October 12, 1810, their vows took place on a large open site in which the following year's Oktoberfest would be celebrated. Ludwig and Therese would have 9 children. He was not a bad ruler. Ludwig had a sensitive side as well, as he was also a poet. His problem was that he ruled in an age of changing times. In 1848, Europe was in upheaval against absolute monarchical rule, inequalities, serfdom, and rule from Rome. Oh, Ludwig was also known as a philanderer. Their first meeting was a little awkward. Ludwig pointed to Lola's bosom. "Are they natural or art?" As Lola revealed herself, "Your Highness, as you can see, they are natural." Within a month, Lola and the king were inseparable. Lola received a residence close to the king's residence, which she quickly declared was too small. She needed room for a salon, something more grand. August 25, 1847, Ludwig would oblige Lola's wishes by making her a magnanimous gift. He declared Lola Montez would forevermore be titled a countess, Marie Grafin von Landsfeld, Baroness of Rosenthal. With her title came jewels, a grand estate, a coat of arms, and a pension for life. Lola was more than Ludwig's lover. She became his trusted advisor. However, Lola was naive to the reality that Bavaria was deeply Roman Catholic, and Bavaria's parliament was controlled by the Jesuits. Lola was Protestant. Her liberal suggestions inflamed the Jesuits as well as the majority of Bavarians. Ludwig crowning Lola a countess was the spark that created a riot to rid Bavaria of both Ludwig and his paramour. Under threat of death, Lola fled to Switzerland. Ludwig abdicated and left in the opposite direction. All the wealth and treasure she had gained under Ludwig disappeared. She did keep one treasure. She was still a countess. While Lola waited in vain for Ludwig to join her, the British and European press had a field day satirizing their affair. Lola Montez became one of the first worldwide celebrities. She was nicknamed the Grand Horizontal, the woman who cost the Bavarian king his throne. The cartoons were savage. Faced with reality, Lola left Switzerland, returning where it all began, back to England. One would expect Lola to be a broken woman. However, it didn't take long for Lola to meet a young officer named George Trafford Heald, who just happened to be receiving a large inheritance. They quickly exchanged vows and were married. George's aunt was outraged and reported the marriage to the police. If you remember, Lola was still married to her first husband. Bigamy was a life sentence in England. The couple quickly escaped to France. In France, Lola and George lived a lavish life, traveling throughout France and Spain, maybe too lavishly, as their marriage acrimoniously dissolved after just 2 years. Having split from husband number 2, Lola set sail for the United States with her maid Anna. Being the bad girl of Europe, the British tabloids took notice of her escape. Lola had her own spin on her travels to America. I was shattered in fortune and broken in health. I came with curiosity and reviving hope to the shores of the New World, this stupendous asylum of the world's unfortunate and the last refuge of victims of the tyranny and the wrongs of the old world. God grant that it may ever stand as it is now, the noblest column of liberty that was ever reared beneath the arch of heaven. Her fellow passenger on the voyage was the famous Hungarian political reformer and fighter for Hungarian independence, Lajos Kossuth. Kossuth arrived to our hero's welcome. At dockside, a New York Herald reporter interviewed a fellow passenger. The Countess had declared Kossuth to be a great humbug. Continuing, the Countess was a favorite among the masculine passengers during the voyage and continually kept them in roars of laughter. Stories of the Countess's escapades in Europe did not go unnoticed in America's newspapers. In her memoir, Lola expressed her frustrations. On arrival in this country, I found that the same terrible power which had pursued me in Europe after the blows I had been given in Germany held even here the means to fill the American press with 1,000 anecdotes and rumors which were entirely unjust and false in relation to me. Lola's immigration papers noted her occupation was danseuse. Her nationality was Spanish, and dance she did, including an original presentation of her experiences in Bavaria. Publicity filled the seats. Always anxious to publicize her presence, she posed with Light in the Cloud, an Arapaho chief. She also posed in a scandalous photo holding a cigarette. After 2 years of performing along the East Coast, Lola was ready for a change. Her interest in California might have come from her investment in gold speculation. Whatever the case, she booked passage for herself, her manager, Edward Willis, and her dog. In part 2, Lola will travel to San Francisco, marry for a 3rd time, become a resident of Grass Valley, and of course, live an eccentric life. The complete collection of our YouTube videos covering the history, flora, fauna, and watershed of the American and Sacramento rivers can be found on www.youtube.com/user/MichaelStark1. Looking for volunteer opportunities in helping preserve our watershed? Visit us on Facebook, the Dry Creek Conservancy serving Placer County, California.